And breaking this morning, Virginia is officially the first southern state to ban the death penalty after Governor Ralph Northam signed legislation yesterday. We were there, and Governor Northam sat down with me for an exclusive interview to explain what went into his decision. Take a look. With a stroke of his pen, Democratic Governor Ralph Northam on Wednesday making Virginia the first state in the South to abolish the death penalty. What does that represent broadly, do you think?
You know, when one looks at the history, close to 1,400 individuals have been executed. The great majority of those individuals were African American. And so that number is disproportionate. Virginia is proud of a lot of things, but one thing we shouldn't be proud of is that we've executed more people than any other state. And this is our time to right that wrong.
It's the culmination of a years-long battle by Virginia Democrats who argued the death penalty is inequitable, ineffective, and inhumane. You took a tour of an execution chamber earlier today. What's your response to the argument, people who say there are some crimes that are so heinous that capital punishment is the only remedy, is the proper remedy?
You know, two wrongs don't make a right. And taking that tour, I had never been in this death chamber. And I'm glad I went in, but it was a very, very powerful experience. And I would say, especially as a doctor, I saw the gurney where individuals are placed and strapped down, and an IV is started, and then they're provided a lethal injection that ends their life. As a doctor, I put a lot of IVs in, but I administer a medicine or a fluid that maintains life. It was very powerful, and I'll never forget it, and it just reaffirms that we're doing the right thing.
An effort to ensure equity, he says, in Virginia's criminal justice system.
Something that I'm so proud of, Jeff. I've watched Virginia evolve over my 60-plus years, and I'm proud to say right now that Virginia is a very diverse state, and it is that diversity that makes us strong. So as we move forward, we want to be inclusive in Virginia. We want our lights to be on, our doors open, and we really want to welcome people to Virginia, and I think this is an important step to doing that.
And joining us now is NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray. And Mark, I have been looking forward to talking with you about this because Virginia, it strikes me, is a case study in what can be done when one party, in this case Democrats, controls both the state house and the governorship. And most people think when they think of progressive politics, they think of states like New York and California. But really, Virginia has passed legislation like gun control, voting rights. They've passed dozens of racial and social equity bills. These are all pieces of legislation that Governor Northam has signed into law, and they've done it quickly. So what can Democrats in other states and what can Democrats at the federal level learn from what Governor Northam and what Democrats are doing in Virginia?
Yeah, Jeff, it's all about winning up and down the ballot. And Democrats in Virginia have dominated up of the ballot over the last 15 years, going a whopping 13-1 in the presidential, gubernatorial, and Senate contests. And then we saw during the Trump era that Democrats did very well in races for state legislature, winning control of the legislature. And it's been a combination fueled by the growth in the Virginia suburbs and the diversity, which Governor Ralph Northam was talking about. And that has spelled Democratic success. And when you talk about the federal level, in some ways, what's playing out in Virginia to me and kind of is playing out at a federal level where Joe Biden, who is kind of a middle of the road ideological Democrat, is president of the United States, and then flanked by Democrats narrowly control the House of Representatives and barely in control of the United States Senate. And that way you're able to produce progressive policies. And so that formula, winning and then pushing the agenda, is being played out, obviously, as you mentioned, in Virginia, but also to a lesser extent in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, and I asked the governor about his sort of legislative success, and he said, policymaking is about timing and opportunity and making good use of both. So what other states do you think have the greatest potential for sort of a red to blue shift so that they could be repeats like we've seen in Virginia?
Yeah, Jeff, when you talk about the growth of the suburbs, the diversity, Democrats have potential opportunities in places like Arizona, where Joe Biden won the presidential election, where we've seen Democrats winning back-to-back Senate contests. Also in Georgia, where Democrats won the 2 runoffs for Senate and control for the Senate, as well as Joe Biden winning that state in the presidential election. But as we saw in Virginia, this does not happen overnight. In Virginia, it was about a 15-year crusade fueled by an unpopular President Trump. And so, what Democrats are going to need to do is continue to win in Georgia and Arizona in 2022, where they're gubernatorial and Senate contests, and as well as win control of the state legislature, which, as we saw in Virginia, was the hardest thing for Democrats to do and will probably be the hardest thing for Democrats to do in places like Arizona and Georgia if they want full control.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.